So in this second half, we're going to have a look at some of the statements by astronauts in relation to the topic of disclosure. And we are going to look at the statements of Buzz Aldrin, Edgar Mitchell and Gordon Cooper, among others. And we'll probably have a look at Neil Armstrong as well. And this is added to statements made by other astronauts such as Dr. Brian O'Leary and Story Musgrave, although I haven't got those here.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Mr. President, members of Congress, fellow astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. So I'll be brief. Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
So what was Armstrong on about? Truth's protective layers? What was he talking about? That was in 1994, the same year that Aldrin's marriage of 38 years broke up. So I get the feeling he thought he might try and disclose something then, but was probably warned off. So what about Buzz Aldrin? Well, if you want to watch the documentary, I think we've probably spoken about this, Astronauts Gone Wild, you'll see him saying to Bart Sibrel, if you show this publicly, I'm going to start a lawsuit. So Bart Sibrel showed it publicly, their interview, but I don't think Aldrin ever started a lawsuit because he knew he would have lost, probably.
But 3 days and 200,000 miles into the flight, Mission Control did miss the significance of a cryptic message from the astronauts.
Do you have any idea where the is with respect to us? Stand by.
The crew required information on the current position of the S-4B, the final stage of the rocket which had been jettisoned away 2 days earlier. This short message hid an extraordinary turn of events. Apollo 11 wasn't alone in space.
There was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be?
Traveling alongside Apollo 11 was a mysterious object, like this one filmed on a later mission. If the object wasn't part of Apollo's rocket, it could be only one thing: a UFO.
Mike decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position, that it had a series of ellipses. But when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much.
NASA knew very little about the object reported by the Apollo 11 crew. It was obviously an unidentified flying object, but such objects were not uncommon, and the history of even Earth orbit space flights going back over the previous years indicated that several crews saw objects.
Despite having a clear view of the UFO, the crew were wary of reporting it to Mission Control.
Now, obviously, the three of us were not going to blurt out, "Hey, Houston, we got something moving alongside of us, and we don't know what it is. You know, can you tell us what it is?" We weren't about to do that. because we know that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people, and who knows what somebody would have demanded that we turn back because of aliens or whatever the reason is. So we didn't do that, but we did decide we just cautiously ask Houston how far away was the S-4B?
Unaware of the drama unfolding in space, Mission Control radioed the position back to Apollo 11.
Apollo 11, Houston, the S-4B is about 6,000 nautical miles from you now, over.
And a few moments later, they came back and said something like it was 6,000 miles away because of the maneuver. So we really didn't think we were looking at something that far away. So we decided that after a while of watching it, it was time to go to sleep and not to talk about it anymore until we came back in debriefing.
To this day, whatever it was the crew saw has never been positively identified or officially acknowledged.
The possibility that you might encounter aliens in space has to be considered in a very sensible and positive and realistic way. There were a lot of people within the program who went off later and became convinced that UFOs existed. And that led to some concern on NASA's part, where they got the agreement of the crew never to publicly talk about these things for fear of ridicule.
I have been always interested in extraterrestrial life, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I had heard that someone was saying that you had seen a UFO. NASA said don't say anything about it, and we might as well get it from the horse's mouth, Buzz. Did you see anything unusual up there?
Well, you know, a guy by the name of Charles Berlitz wrote something about the Roswell incident, and to establish his credibility, he had a little table in the front of his book which attempted to take advantage of alleged observations of people, of unusual sightings. And he specifically referred to Anglia TV's reported this, that had been cited by somebody else, that Neil and I saw some green things, green creatures. Well, this kind of spoiled my credibility and a lot of other people. So I decided to take him to court and sue him because he was repeating phrases that were inaccurate. He's not done the right kind of, well, we won the suit. And I, you know, hopefully it would cause a few people to be a little bit more careful in how they try and treat trusted servants of our government and of our people to tell the truth. I just feel that it's a little irresponsible of people to, especially after so many years, to bring up subjects that have been explained rather thoroughly, especially in our case in debriefings.
Other people with their habitation, we can keep track. If there's something very important to be developed from the moon, I'm not sure what it is right now, and I sure think we should identify what it is for America to make such gross expenditures again for human habitation on the moon. We can help, we can join with, together we can explore the moon and develop the moon. We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. when people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there? Who put that there? Well, the universe put it there. If you choose, God put it there.
So all that why I was playing that clip is it's clear that Aldrin's story, you can't get his story straight. He tells a big long story about the S4B thing which he saw in space, but yet when he talks to George Newry, which was a few months later, he doesn't even mention it. He talks about somebody saying, oh, somebody tried to say he'd seen Little Green Men.
Yeah, which obviously
You know.
isn't what George Newry was talking about.
No.
He must have heard him talking about the thing.
The booster, yeah.
Trailing them.
So why didn't he say, well, actually we thought, you know, it was a UFO, but actually it turned out to be the booster or something? I know he didn't say that in the video clip, but what he said was nothing like what he said in the documentary, which... So this is inconsistent behaviour.
Saying, you know, he got discredited by this guy.
Yeah, Charles Berlitz.
About, isn't it?
So that, you know, this is where you start looking into the astronauts themselves, and they can't get their story straight. And not only on this stuff, but on the Apollo stuff itself. You know,
There's no
so...
consistency in when they're interviewed.
Well, not about this sort of stuff. And then there's all these stories of... you know, of Armstrong being on the moon and them seeing things on the rim of the crater and then being told... But that's all disinformation from what I can work out, because if you try and find out when those statements were made and who recorded them or get recordings of them, you can't. You know, there's no recordings of those statements, and it's meant to be some radio ham, some anonymous radio ham that picked up these messages when they were listening.
It's
you know.
like those stories of the World Trade Center about it being closed off from 3 a.m.
This is him.
Oh, you're coming up to him.
This is him.
If you're going to press me on this, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, because I won't pursue this. All of this attempt to say the Apollo programs were fake is just sheer nonsense. And you can talk till hell freezes over, and you're wrong. Okay?
Well, would you affirm...
I won't continue on this line.
Would you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon?
You bet your sweet ass.
Okay. Put your left hand on the Bible. Put your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand. And say, I, Edgar Mitchell.
I, Edgar Mitchell.
Affirm.
Affirm.
Under penalty of eternal damnation.
I don't believe in that, but... penalty of eternal damnation.
That I walked on the moon on Apollo 14.
That I walked on the moon on Apollo 14.
Well, you know, you're the first astronaut to do that. We asked 6 other astronauts to swear on the Bible, and they refused to do it.
Well, I don't particularly like to take oaths like that either, because I don't accept the Bible as a gospel of anything except a historical record. But we did go to the moon. You bet your sweet ass we went to the moon. Okay, turn off the camera. Your interview is done. I've given you all the time I'm going to give you.
Okie dokie. Good to meet you.
I don't say it's a pleasure.
Understand.
Please get your ass out of my house.
Okay.
And you came here under false pretenses, and I think you're an asshole.
Well,
and if you continue this, and if you press us, I will personally take you to court.
I hope that you do. I invite you to. I'm going to give you my card so you can arrange that. And I'm encouraging you to arrange...
You're frankly not worth it.
No, we have you on the record saying you'll take me to court. I hope you do. Because we have proof that would prove it in a court of law that Apollo 11 didn't go to the moon. And I think it's something that you should see. I don't say that lightly, believe me. I don't say it lightly.
You're not joking, sir. People can have fun. And maybe do that if they feel like they want to have a little fun on a trip to the moon. As an independent producer...
Okay, we're heading out.
Doing that is against moral ethics.
Lying about going to the moon is a satanic lie of gigantic proportions.
I don't hit people, but you're going to be on the deck unless you get...
I'm heading out. I appreciate it.
And get the hell out of my house.
Go get a gun and shoot them at them before they get out of the office?
We have a video camera running if you want to do it.
Right.
That would be great footage for us. See you later. In court, I hope.
Want to call the CIA? Have them whacked.
Until the current period, or until the last 30 years, It was conventional wisdom, both in science and theology. We're alone in the universe, the single repository of life anywhere in the known universe. Well, no one believes that anymore. Well, if the accounts are to be believed, yes, there have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge.
We are now joined by a distinguished American in West Palm Beach, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, sixth man to walk on the moon. Many of the Roswell witnesses told Dr. Mitchell their accounts, which he says were later verified by a contact at the Pentagon. What do you believe, Dr. Mitchell?
Well, I can say, Larry, I have no first-hand experience, but all of my experience comes from what I call the old-timers that at some point in their, before they passed on, and these were folks all gone now, and because I was who I was, because I'd lived in the area, I grew up in the area, and because I was an astronaut, some of them wanted to get it off their chest before they passed on, and I happened to be selected to hear their story. And all of them, as I heard some of the earlier testimony, all of them were under very severe oaths and fear and penalty for talking, but they did want to talk. I happen to have lived in the area, and I grew up in the area, and my family had farming and ranch holdings and farm machinery holdings. We knew many of the people, including the ranch where this was discovered, and in spite of all of the security oaths, etc., the talk in the community was of what it was, that it was a alien craft, and that survived all of the other stories and all of the other oaths and so forth. It was there for a long time. I happen to have lived there. As a matter of fact, Robert Goddard, the father of American rocketry, his farm was right down the road from ours, and I walked past his home every day going there. So I feel fairly well informed on all of this. And like some of your earlier witnesses, Larry, whose fathers talked to them or whose parents talked to them, and they were involved, we heard the same thing. We knew it. It was not really covered up. And so these stories did get out, even though the day after the official announcement had come out in the Roswell Record in the newspaper and was refuted the next day, there was a lot of snickering and laughing going on about what in the world's going on here.
One of the pivotal people that I encountered early in my career was Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut.
Edgar J. Mitchell, an Apollo mission astronaut, founded the Noetics Institute in Southern California. The Institute's charter was supposedly to develop alternative energy systems by attracting inventors from all over the country. Mitchell became extremely interested in De Palma's N machine. He made De Palma a paltry offer to buy out the invention, which De Palma naturally refused.
He said to me that if I ever tried anything on my own in California, I would get my head blown off. So I was scared to death. The CIA operates through various very innocent-looking fronts to find out what people are thinking and what they're inventing. Now, what's more innocent than the Denying Institute founded on transcendental principles to help New Age inventors bring free energy into the world?
So that he goes into a lot more detail on his website, Bruce De Palma, about that incident and how Mitchell wanted to. De Palma's dead. He died in 1997. Allegedly, he suicide, and he was allegedly a drug user and an alcoholic. Allegedly, Edgar Mitchell is basically, I think, fulfilling two roles. One is to be a magnet that people come to that are interested in this stuff and see him as a credible figure, and the other is to put out disinformation, which is what he's doing. Pardon?
What disinformation is he putting out?
Well, for example, he won't talk about the NASA UFOs themselves, like the ones that were observed in the Tether incident. He won't talk about that. He won't talk about the Tether incident, even though it happened on STS-75, a NASA shuttle mission. I've got another video clip about that. I don't know if I've got it here, but... And in this interview in 1996, which I put this in the article as well that I posted more recently, this came from Richard Hoagland's website, actually, because Richard Hoagland was involved in this interview. Edgar Mitchell said, "When people ask me, what did it feel like to be on the moon, being a super rationalist and a PhD and all of that, I didn't think it was a germane question." Germane means relevant. He didn't think it was a question that was worth answering. And I said, and then he said later on, "Should I know what it felt like on the moon? So I went to some good friends of mine, Dr. Jane Houston and her husband Bob Master, and I said, help me find out what I felt like on the moon." That's what he said in this interview. And that began the investigation of inner experiences for me back in 1972 and led to the approaches that I have taken in the understanding experience and the psychic experience and all this whole subject matter. But he said in a documentary which was made in 2013 that he worked for the CIA in relation. He was investigating Uri Geller, and then he had a meeting with George Bush about Uri Geller and Uri Geller's abilities. He said that in that documentary. It's called The Secret Life of Uri Geller, which, if you haven't seen it, I recommend you watch it. It's 90 minutes long.
Yeah, we should see that.
It's very interesting. Because it does it's on Vimeo. If you go to Uri Geller's website, he's got a link to it, and you just put in a password, and you can put in the full version. No, he's not. He's probably a trickster.
Why was he being investigated?
Well, he was part of some psychological operation, I think, a bigger psychological operation related to psychic phenomena. I think maybe he did have some kind of ability, but maybe not quite what was being claimed. But he admits he did work for Mossad pretty much in that documentary. Geller more or less admits that. He doesn't use those words, but if you watch the documentary, you'll realise he was heavily involved in working for the intelligence agencies. So Mitchell's been involved in the CIA work, as Bruce De Palma said, that they operate through various innocent-looking fronts like Noetic Sciences, and if you look on their website, they've got a trademark. It says Institute of Noetic Sciences (TM) trademark on their website. Why do they need a trademark? For, consciousness, enlightenment and all of that stuff, Hey-ho.
In 1965, Gordon Cooper was the last American astronaut to go up into space alone.
What they think on it. Now the action that I have taken is to turn off my 05G switch fuse and my...
He orbited the planet 22 times.
I think that those of you that know me know that I've always spoken honestly and straightforward to you. I intend to do so today.
10 years earlier, while stationed at Edwards Air Force Base, Cooper witnessed an event that has yet to be explained nearly 50 years later. He was supervising the filming of a precision landing facility for F-86 fighter jets. Suddenly, a saucer-like craft flew directly over the cameraman. 3 landing gear apparatus opened, and the object landed on the dry lake bed.
They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic. And they went out, picked up their cameras, and moved on out toward him filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared.
Cooper had the film footage of the strange craft developed. By the time it returned from processing, he had gone up through the ranks to report the incident.
Finally, with the colonel telling me to, when the film arrived at my desk, to put it in the carrier pouch. There would be a courier there at my office by that time already, and they'd arranged for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films.
Did you watch the film?
we didn't have a chance to run it. I had a chance to hold it up to the window and look at it. It was certainly good film.
After the developed film was sent by plane to Washington, it was never seen or heard of again.
Did you ever keep in touch with anybody about it or discuss it?
How would I keep in touch with anybody about it? There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified unless you're directly involved in it, and I was not.
So there you go. He saw the object landing and they filmed it. Was he making that up? So Aldrin has flip-flopped and he's switched between apparent disclosure and denial. Mitchell is adopting limited hangout, stating he knows or knew unnamed sources who told him stuff and he believes that, but he denies NASA's own video footage shows intelligently controlled objects. I didn't show that clip, but I've got that clip elsewhere. That's when David Sarita wrote to him. I wrote about that in the article that I've got on my website as well. I did a transcript of, or got the transcript of David Sarita's letters. Cooper's disclosures seem to get greater and greater over the years, and his disclosure of seeing a film of a landing coming only 1 or 2 years before he died. Actually, that story, I got that wrong. He started telling that story in about 1997. I think was the first time he told that publicly. I found an earlier clip. Cooper was dropped from the Apollo program in favour of Alan Shepard, though he was scheduled to head up the Mars program according to a 1996 interview with Michael Lindemann. But I think they dropped Cooper from the Apollo program because he was more honest. He would have been more difficult to control than the other guys, I think. That's probably one of the reasons why they dropped him. And then, of course, we go on to Travis.
That's a good quote.
Yeah, that's what he said. I think that's in his book.
Just after sunset on the evening of November 5th, 1975, a 7-man crew was piling into a 4-wheel drive vehicle after finishing a day of woodcutting near the tiny northern Arizona community of Snowflake. One of the 7 men was Travis Walton, whose curiosity that night plunged him into a living nightmare he would never forget. Just before leaving the work area, the men in the Jeep watched a glowing object emerge from behind the trees. Travis opened a door to get a better view and continued watching, stunned with his companions.
The thing was about 90 feet away, about 20 feet in diameter, about 8 feet high. It was glowing a golden color, kind of like molten metal. I couldn't hear anything at first. It must have been because when I got closer I could hear it, but it was a high-pitched intermittent sound and a low rumbling sound. It sounded like machinery or, a heavy mechanical sound. Very difficult to describe.
Travis got out of the vehicle and moved toward the object, despite cries from his friends for him to return. Walton assumed by the time he could get any closer, the object would be gone.
Just as I got up close, it started to move with a sort of a rocking motion, kind of like a spinning top, like when it's slowing down to fall over, except it wasn't spinning. The same side stayed toward me. And when it started to move, it got real loud, and that really scared me. I jumped down behind a log, and I looked up at this thing, and I decided then I was in a lot of danger, and I was going to get the heck out of there. And I raised up to go. It's the last thing I remember. I raised up and I started to turn, and I was just about in a high crouch when wham, I felt a numbing shock hit me. It kind of like in the head, and I went out. I was knocked unconscious.
His 6 co-workers, however, saw what Travis had not. A slender beam of intense light which shot from the craft and lifted Walton off his feet, knocking him to the ground. The rest of the crew sped away in panic, looking back to see the craft take off. But when they returned to see if Travis was all right, he was nowhere to be found. When Travis finally came to, he was weak, groggy, and in pain. Above him was a light. He assumed he was in a hospital bed, but as his blurred vision became clearer, he discovered he was wrong.
I felt something pressing on my chest. My shirt and my jacket pushed up, and there was this thing laying across it. It was about 4 or 5 inches thick. The thing extended down over my rib cage and down to my belt. And when I looked up and I saw this thing. It was gray. And I looked past the edge of it, and I saw something white. My eyes weren't focusing real good. And at first I thought it was a doctor, you know, white mask and cap. But when I got to where I could see, I saw this thing, and I just came unglued. I looked around me, and there was three of them. I just panicked. I became hysterical.
As his eyes became accustomed to the surroundings, Travis saw his captors in more detail.
They were about 4 feet 10. Had very large heads. No hair on their heads. No eyebrows. No whiskers or anything like that. They had very large eyes. Those eyes are something that really bothered me worse than anything. The rest of their features were small. It was like small ears, small nose, small mouth. Hardly any lips if they had any lips. I never saw them open their mouth. But they were wearing a long coverall type things. They were orangish tan. When I saw them, I struck out. I wasn't really a blow. I was so weak. I pushed this one on my right, and he fell back into another one. They felt kind of marshmallowy, kind of like fat, you know. Whereas, you know, when you push against somebody with muscle, it feels differently. But they seemed light, unexpectedly. And I jumped off the table there and staggered over into the corner. There was a bench across the wall, and I leaned there. And I was really weak, and I was so scared, you know, I was shaking, and they started towards me, and I started just screaming at them, you know, telling them to keep away from me. And I reached over and I grabbed a thing off of the table. There was some bunch of things there, and there was a clear tube about maybe an inch in diameter, I don't know, 1.5 feet long. And I thought, it wasn't heavy like glass, and it was too light for a club, and so I wanted to defend myself, and so I hit it against the table to break it, you know, maybe get a sharp point, but it didn't break. But I lashed out at them with it, and I kept screaming. They only took a couple of steps, and they stopped.
After the creatures departed, Travis left the room through the same door, but went down the hallway in the opposite direction.
I came to a doorway on my right, and I went into this. I didn't go right in. I looked in, and it was a round room, a domed room, with a chair in the middle. And it was really funny about this room. It's really strange. It looked like, you know, I could see the walls and everything, the same as everything else in that place. It was all just this matte gray metal look. But when I went towards the chair, I didn't go towards the chair right away. I walked around towards the side because the chair was high-backed, and I was afraid that there might be one of those things sitting in that chair. So I went around there, and when I could see that there was nobody in the chair, I walked over to it. But the closer I got to the chair, the darker the room seemed. And I could start seeing points of light, like the stars. There was buttons there. You know, I did a stupid thing. I pushed some, you know, hoping to open the door or something. But when that didn't work, well, I got scared of doing that too, because it made the stars move. I turned, and there was a man standing in the doorway I came through. And this guy, I mean, he appeared human to me, you know, which was a big relief. And I ran up there and started asking him all kinds of questions. And he just smiled, kind of tolerant-like. And I assumed that maybe he couldn't hear me because he had the helmet on his head, a clear helmet. And so when he motioned for me, and he took me by the arm, I went with him. I assumed I was being rescued.
Travis was led out of the craft and into a large hangar, where more human-like figures were present. He remembers their appearance this way.
They'd pass, you know, on the street, but they had a strange thing to their eyes. They were a light color, a golden hazel, you know, and they had a resemblance to each other, like a family, but not identical. There was one of them that was a woman, I could tell, had longer hair and female shape. One of the men and the woman came over there and they put me on the table, and they put a mask over my face, and I started to resist, and they held me on the table and they put this mask on my face, and I reached up to pull it away, and before I could, everything went black.
Meanwhile, the other members of the woodcutting crew had reported Walton missing. Local police organized a search party, but no trace of Walton was found. The next thing he remembered, Travis was lying on the side of a road outside Heber, Arizona, 12 miles from Snowflake.
When I first regained conscience, I was laying on the roadway, well, to the side of the road, more off than on, and my head was on my arm, and I saw a light, and I looked up in time to see it go off, which I think was either a light going off or a hatch closing, perhaps. Then I saw this object hovering there. It was a flattened sphere. I mean, it was shaped like a disc, but it was very shiny, chrome-like. I could see that reflecting everything around there, but not giving off any light. It was dark, and it was just there for a second, hovering about 4 feet off the ground, and then it just shot straight up. It was incredible how quick, without making a sound.
Travis staggered to a phone booth to call his family, who at first did not believe it was really him. But once convinced, they came to take him home. On the way, Travis received yet another shock.
We were riding back in, and Mary said something about everybody being worried about me. I can't remember the exact conversation, but I said, well, you know, it must have been a bad couple of hours or something, to reference the time or something like that. And they said, Travis, you've been gone for 5 days.
While recuperating, Travis was able to remember most of what had happened to him. A series of hypnotic regressions with Dr. James Harder from the University of California, however, enabled Walton to recall things with less anxiety and more detail.
So there you go. That was the story of Travis Walton that he told in 1978. I've got that whole LP on my website. This is really weird, this.
Inteligente. Vea usted esta extraordinaria investigación con Johanan Díaz.
Un día después de que le presentamos el video del ovni expulsor de esferas captado en satélite en el municipio de Naucalpan, Estado de México, el pasado.
I mean, what the hell is that? You've seen it, yeah. Did you see the second film of it, though? You'll see that in a minute. This is from another angle. So 2 people filmed it. This is from, you know, the other direction.
Y estando en la azotea de su casa en el coña, va de un lado para otro y es cuando regresan a ella 4 posibles esferas. Aquí, una comparación con el video de Pedro Hernández que dura 2 minutos con
So Pedro Hernandez and Alfredo Carrillo, they both filmed it.
Con la filmación de Hernández, el sol le pega de frente a estos objetos y por ello se ven amarillos rojizos. Recordemos que está atardeciendo y que fue tomado desde la parte norte, mientras que Carrillo lo toma a contraluz desde Azcapotzalco. Estos 2 lugares están separados en línea recta por cerca de 6 a 8 kilómetros. Para el minuto 1:36 pasa por el lugar un segundo avión. Podemos darnos cuenta cómo el testigo tiene que bajar la toma para que no le pegue de frente en los rayos solares.
So I think that I put this in because it was, you know, it come out about the time I was making this presentation, so I thought it was a good addition. Because, I mean, it's an incredible piece of film, that. I mean, I still don't think I've seen one as good as that, as weird as that, since then. Yeah, right. So the chances... And I mean, Jaime Maussan himself has been wrapped up in controversy because of that little creature. You know, they've apparently caught the little sort of creature with the strange teeth. And do you remember seeing that at all? But it turned out to be a monkey, a marmoset monkey. So what I proposed here is that there's at least two threads of disclosure. One thread seems to be that we are to be being controlled by the Western media and is generally fear-based. That is the general, you know, you've probably seen that yourselves, I don't need to tell you that. Either they say the aliens are going to harm us, or they give the impression that things are going to be bad if we know about them. You know, human abductions, animal mutilations may also be components of a negative disclosure program. And if they've got these secret technologies and they put those in the media every so often, and people realise it's something which can't be being done by conventional technology, it's pretty scary, isn't it, to see these animals with eyes gouged out, and you know, it's pretty scary, gruesome, you know, guttural stuff, isn't it? You know, yeah, yeah, yeah. So if they're trying to say, you know, that this is what these aliens could do to us, I mean, you can't get much more scary than that.
Analyse it, you know, but it sinks into your subconscious.
Yeah, exactly,
You know,
exactly.
So that's sort of, and when you see something related to it, you go straight to that place to get that kind of response, that sort of fear.
You know, and you have to ask yourself, if they've got this technology to do that kind of thing to animals, why did they just leave them in the field? Why are they just leaving them on the ground? Why aren't, if they really want them for genetic testing or whatever, why don't they take the corpses with them and then, you know, dump them in space, or just use all the tissue for more testing or whatever they need? The fact that they're leaving it there, to me, appears that whoever's doing it, which I don't think is necessarily aliens, not necessarily, they're leaving it as a calling card. It's a message. It's a psychological aspect to it.
It's a bit serial killer.
Yeah, I think maybe you're right. And these other events where we're getting these, I mean, like the Travis Walton case, I think the people that were involved with, you know, the aliens that were involved with Travis Walton, I think they were good guys, basically. I don't think they were, you know, he thinks they tried to help him. You know, you can read his book anyway, he writes a lot more about that.
They brought him back, at least.
Yeah, and if you read the book, he's got some thoughts on that whole thing, you know, quite interesting to read. But I think the people who are running Planet Earth, those that did 9/11, are behind the negative disclosure thread. I think that's all the fear-based paradigm and all of that stuff. And that those outside agencies, because I do think Wilbert Smith did have real contact with some consciousness or beings or something. You know, he never met them physically. I think they're on the positive side. I think they're positive. They seem to be trying to help him, trying to give him good information. He built stuff, it worked. And I think each person makes a choice as to which side they kind of spend the most time looking at. I think, you know, looking at all these figures, you get some are convinced that all the aliens are really bad guys, you know, and then others who think they're all good, but it seems to be a mixture.
Good morning, my name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a 6th grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Werner von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space. And I said, you know, teachers don't stop until June. He said, no, you have to understand, this is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system, the first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies.
And as the witnesses said, it was like a movie. Well, what movie was it like? Maybe it was a bit like Independence Day.
It's just literally turning into dust.
It is literally turning into dust. I hope you remember that when you get older.
And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. And the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat.
What happens when they run out of ISIS's and Osama bin Laden's and...
Yeah, the Stooges.
You know, they just need to spend maybe 10 or 20 years getting rid of the ridicule factor, which may be what the Disclosure movement is now, like Steve Bassett and all those guys. Maybe they're helping to get rid of the ridicule factor for the people to get ready for that. I don't know. It's just, I'm just saying, be aware of that as a scenario, you know, that they're going to use to manipulate people, potentially, you know, potentially. What Wilbert Smith did, going back to him, so I thought this was a good way to end it. The audio is not brilliant, but hopefully you can hear it better on with Matt switched on the sound. So this is about 18 minutes.
1958. W.B. Smith speaking. I have been actively engaged in the investigation of the group of phenomena known as flying saucers for over 7 years. During this period, I have read most of the available literature on the subject, interviewed a great many people who have seen unusual things in the sky, examined many pictures and physical objects, made observations with scientific instruments, and carried on series of communications with intelligences claiming to be extraterrestrial. I started the investigation out of curiosity and as an extreme skeptic, fully expecting to find the phenomena to be due to man-made or natural causes. I am 48 years old, hold a master's degree in electrical engineering, occupy a responsible position in the Canadian government, hold a half-dozen patents, author of several technical papers, and in general enjoy a background in technical work and science indicating at least an average competence to study and report on phenomena of a scientific nature. I have tried so far as possible to use conventional and standard methods and equipment, and to investigate all possible angles before drawing any conclusions. In other words, I have followed the same general procedures which I would have followed if I had undertaken to study some more prosaic subject, such as radio wave propagation. The first phase of the work consisted of reading all available literature, collecting as much observational data as possible, and in general getting a fair perspective of the problem. The second phase involved theoretical and laboratory work to find openings in our technology and to establish relevant reference points. And the third phase involved following up the many and varied leads which developed from the first two phases. I do not intend to dwell on the first phase of this work, as my experience was quite parallel with that of other investigators who have provided extensive published reports of their findings. Nor will I dwell on the many dead ends which were explored, which looked promising at first, but faded out under careful investigation. Nor will I be able to be as specific as I would like to be with respect to material given to me in confidence, or which came to me through classified channels. Furthermore, it is not my intention to try and convert anyone to my way of thinking, but merely to state what I believe and why I believe it. Let us look at a few facts. First, hundreds of normal, honest people have seen lights in the sky which behaved like no light normally seen in the sky ought to behave. Second, hundreds of normal, honest people have seen what appear to be solid, real objects in the sky, which behaved like no object normally seen in the sky ought to behave. Third, hundreds of people have seen objects in the Earth's atmosphere at sufficiently close range to see enough detail to enable them to say definitely what the object was not, even though they could not identify what it was. Fourth, descriptions of these objects from observers where circumstances virtually preclude collusion check quite well among themselves and against data received from other sources. It is not reasonable to assume that hundreds of ordinary, normal people, whose word we would readily accept under more mundane circumstances, for instances as witnesses to an automobile accident, should suddenly become liars, fools, neurotics, and otherwise quite incompetent observers. I have interviewed many of these people myself, and I am convinced that they are sane, sober, honest folk who are reporting as best they can something which they really did witness. I will concede that maybe some of these people did not do as good a job of observing as someone who was better trained might have done, but within their limits, I believe they did honestly report what they saw. Let us look at a few more facts. First, there have been several close brushes with these objects, and in one case at least, the aircraft pilot lost his life as a consequence. Captain Mantell was reported killed as a result of chasing a flying saucer on January 7, 1947. The incident is described in detail in the report on unidentified flying objects by Edward J. Ruppelt, pages 51 to 60. Second, people who have been near these objects have described physical sensations which are unusual to say the least, but which are quite consistent with what is known of the technology under which they operate. As nearly as we are able to recreate the accident, Mantell was pursuing an unidentified flying object and was able to get quite near. In fact, apparently well into its operating field. His aircraft just fell apart and was scattered over quite an area. Mantell's body, when recovered, was not displayed even to his next of kin. Several people who have found themselves close to these objects have remarked on the insufferable heat which seemed to pervade the general region. Also, there seemed to be a gravitational necessity to lean away from the object to maintain balance. While these facts may seem to be rather incredible, nevertheless, there exists quite a good record in support of each occurrence. Furthermore, the technology of which we have been able to get a glimpse, namely that of manipulation of the three basic fields, electric, magnetic, and tempic, indicates quite a straightforward answer and explanation of these phenomena. In Mantell's case, the altered field configuration in the vicinity of the craft reduced the binding forces within the structure of the aircraft to a value below that of the load which the parts were expected to carry, so it just came apart. Also, there was probably a substantial reduction in tempic field intensity, which would give in effect a rise in temperature to the aircraft and contents. I understand that Mantell's body gave every indication of having been subjected to considerable heat. This rise in temperature has been reported as being quite noticeable at distances of several hundred feet from one of these craft when it is making use of certain combinations of fields. Also, since gravity involves a tempic field function, it follows that an alteration in this field could well be reflected in the direction and magnitude of the nearby gravity field. There have been quite a number of alleged communications with intelligences claiming to be extraterrestrial. I have followed up each such instance to the best of my ability in an effort to A, establish or disprove the validity of the alleged communication, and B, to obtain any information which might be available if the contact should be authentic. As might be expected, Many of these alleged contacts provided little or nothing of value, but a few did pay off. Some of the contacts have been the subject of published material, but by far the majority are confidential, and there are a surprising number of these contacts. The procedure in checking contacts was to ask a number of innocuous but significant questions and compare the answers with the answers to the same questions as obtained through other contacts. Questions were of the type, do people live on the planet Mars? If so, what is the shape of their houses? Do people on Mars use money? If so, what does it look like? Altogether, some 100 or more questions were involved. The results were spectacular, to say the least. Among the contacts that might be classed as authentic, there was almost complete agreement. Among the other alleged contacts, there was extremely poor agreement or none at all. Of course, where agreement was general, but one or two points didn't fit, an effort was made to find out why the discrepancy. In each case, it was found that someone had injected a terrestrial idea or comment instead of transmitting faithfully that which was received. Now, having located what seemed to be channels of communication between ourselves and these extraterrestrial intelligences, the next and obvious step was to try and get as much information as possible. As may be expected, this effort was at first directed toward science and technology. But it soon became apparent that there was a very real and quite large gap between this alien science and the science in which I had been trained. Certain crucial experiments were suggested and carried out, and in each case the results confirmed the validity of the alien science. Beyond this, the alien science was just incomprehensible. There followed a period of soul-searching during which many doubts were raised. While we were able to establish that these people from outside all told the same story, was that story the truth? True, there existed some pretty good evidence to support their statements, but maybe there was some other more conventional explanation. If the whole thing were a delusion, then quite a large number of people were suffering from precisely the same delusion. And furthermore, delusions are not externalized. At least I had never heard of such a case. If, on the other hand, it were a hoax, it was by far the most gigantic hoax the world had ever known. And to what end and by whom was it perpetrated? The inevitable conclusion was that it was all real enough, but that the alien science was definitely alien, and possibly even forever beyond our comprehension. So another approach was tried, the philosophical, and here the answer was found in all its grandeur. I will not go into detail on the many revisions in ideas and basic thinking, beyond stating that the people from outside displayed great patience and understanding in overcoming the prejudices and misinformation I had spent many years in accumulating. I began for the first time in my life to realize the basic oneness of the universe and all that is in it. Science, philosophy, religion, substance, and energy are all facets of the same jewel, and before any one facet can be appreciated, the form of the jewel itself must be perceived. One of the most important things I had to realize was that we are not alone. The human race in the form of man extends throughout the universe and is incredibly ancient. Also, its appearance in physical form is but one of its many manifestations along the path of progress. Our civilization here on Earth now is only one of many that have come and gone. This planet has been colonized many times by people from elsewhere, and our present human race are blood brothers of these people. Is it any wonder that they are interested in us? To orthodox thinkers this may seem strange, but not nearly so strange as our orthodox ideas on evolution. The question might be asked, if these people are our brothers and are interested in our welfare, why do they remain so aloof? The answer is available. There is a basic law of the universe which grants each and every individual independence and freedom of choice, so that he may experience and learn from his experiences. No one has the right to interfere in the affairs of others. In fact, our 10 Commandments are directives against interference. If we disregard this law, we must suffer the consequences, and a little thought will show that our present world state is directly attributable to violation of this principle. When we enter this life, we do so to participate in certain events, the sequence of which was established before our birth, and which, if altered substantially, would deprive us of experiences necessary to our development. We have built-in protection against altering substantially these sequences in that we do not consciously know of them. But these people from outside have a much greater knowledge than we have, and have means of perceiving the sequences which must not be changed. Therefore, while they have every desire in the world to help, and stand by, ready, able, and willing to do so, they are not permitted by cosmic law to interfere. The dividing line between help and interference is very delicate indeed, and sometimes hard to perceive. But it is a demonstration of individual and collective progress how well we can be guided by it. I am told that one of our difficulties is that we do not recognize a sufficient number of dimensions and make use of them in our science. Furthermore, we do not recognize the true nature of dimensions or of their place in our universe. I am told that so far as we are concerned, there are 12 dimensions of deity, and these provide the entire structure of our universe. Our conventional concepts of dimensions are most inadequate and restrictive, and so long as we persist in them, we can never transcend the world of mechanical processes which we have built. In science, we have an established procedure always to tie a new discovery or observation to that which we already know, even though to do so requires extensive patchwork and perturbation factors to be applied to our existing knowledge to make the new knowledge fit. We invariably assume that the new knowledge must somehow be closely related to the old, and we are most zealous in tying the two together. As a consequence, we bend and warp our units of knowledge so that we can fasten them together, whether or not they belong together, until we have fabricated quite a structure which is almost completely closed on itself. Consequently, when we do find knowledge that should but just won't fit our structure, we have no alternative but to reject it. I am informed that science really is much more simple than we imagine, and all the component parts fit together perfectly without any corrections. Possibly we should start over again and reassemble our knowledge in a different pattern, and this time fit the jigsaw puzzle together properly without trimming the pieces. I feel sure that if we were to do this and accept the philosophy upon which this new approach must of necessity be based, we can enjoy the technology and the way of life which is demonstrated to us by the presence of the spacecraft and of our brothers from elsewhere. Thank you.
And he said, I make no attempt to prove anything and have no intention of doing so. It is up to each and everyone to search out the truth and decide for themselves just what is truth. Truth needs no justification, it stands alone. That's what he said in some of his writings. So you can get all of that on Presidential UFO. I've got it on CD. And that's the end.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and a privilege.